Back a year ago.
This episode of the Beer Bound Podcast is brought to you by Rolling Hops Beer Tours.
Hey everybody, Garrett here from Rolling Hops, as always joined with my partner,
Andy.
We're here to tell you guys about our virtual craft beer tour offering. With what's going on in the world, unfortunately, we haven't been able to run our historical craft walking beer tour, so we've pivoted to taking the virtual experience of craft beer directly to you guys. Wonderful for team building events, corporate events, even just a night out or in, for that matter, with your friends and family. And we're doing this online.
Have any questions about the beer tours or want us to tailor make an event for you? Just shoot us an email or send us a message on any form of social media. Rolling Hops, you can find us everywhere.
RollingHopsBeerTours.com is where you can get a hold of us, and we'll see you guys soon.
Cheers.
All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Beer Bound Podcast. We are excited to be joined by Michael P. Foley, author of Drinking with the Saints, The Sinner's Guide to a Holy Happy Hour. Michael graduated from Boston College with a Ph.D. in systematic theology. He has been teaching in the Great Texts program at Baylor University in Waco, Texas, since 2004. Michael loves teaching, writing, and speaking to audiences about topics ranging from theology and film to the fine art of pious drinking. The new deluxe edition of Drinking with the Saints is now out and available. We encourage everyone to check it out. Along with his writing abilities, you can find Michael traveling the world. We will be sure to include more details in the description of this episode pertaining to Michael's river cruise pilgrimage, which is entitled Drinking and Dining with the Saints on the Douro River Cruise. This exciting adventure takes its guests through Portugal and Spain and is set for April 2023. Very exciting. We're looking forward to learning more about Michael and everything that he's up to. Michael, welcome to the Beer Bound Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Wonderful. Well, we gave a little bit of information on you, Mike, but maybe can you give us a little bit more on who you are, your connection, your academic background, but also how it pertains maybe to your writings on both beer as well as alcoholic beverages in general?
Well, I have been an almost lifelong fan of beer. And I'm happy to go into some of my first encounters with that magical drink. But I do most of my academic work in theology, but I also noticed that there is a very old tradition of cooperation between alcohol and Christianity. And that's part of the reason why I was inspired to write Drinking with the Saints, Drinking with Saint Nick, and Drinking with Your Patron Saints, the sort of series of cocktail books that pair beer, wine, and cocktail suggestions with the feast days of the church year.
Very cool. Well, maybe could we even go back further a little bit? Could you, if you don't mind, touching on your faith a little bit? Why you originally entered took an academic focus towards a more theological specialization. Where does that come from in your life, in your faith in particular? Maybe can you give us a little bit more context to that?
Well, it comes from my family, Andy, that my father was Irish German, my mother was French Canadian. My mother was one of 14 children, and I'm from Southern California. I'm now in Waco, Texas, but I was born in Southern California, and a number of my mom's relatives and my mom had moved down to California. And so I grew up with these huge family events for Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. And I remember being a little kid, just hearing the roars of laughter, a merriment, just as everyone got together, had a few drinks, shared stories, shared memories, and they would wake me up because, you know, I was too young and I was at the end of the hall. And I just remember thinking, this is merriment, this is festivity, this is a good thing. And then I'd wake up in the morning and the counter in the kitchen and the dining room table would be littered with empty glasses. And I thought, you know, they had a good time. Nobody got hurt. They enjoyed themselves, but it was genuine joy. And so I understood alcohol as a part of a culture of merriment. And then I, you know, grew up, I was interested in theology, and I realized, yeah, this is what it's all about, is a certain joyfulness as a Christian, and I'm a Catholic. You know, just we have reason to celebrate.
Yeah, we certainly do. Well, I'm curious too, because say if you're a devout Catholic, as an example, or a particular sect of Christianity or a different faith entirely, I suppose if you're really interested in delving further into the faith, there's a few different avenues you can take. So why academia? Why not maybe the priesthood, or maybe other focuses or particular specializations within Catholicism? Why the academic world?
Well, for me, it was a realization that I really wanted to get married. And so that kind of ruled out the priesthood. I went into theology because I was just interested in the questions. And I was a religious studies major as an undergraduate. And then I finished that and I thought, but I still have more questions. And so I then went on to grad school in theology. And I never really thought about being a teacher or a professor. I was just interested in the questions. And then about two or three years into it, I realized, well, I'm not going to be a priest. I'm going to get a degree in theology. I guess I'm going to be a teacher. And turned out to be great. I love teaching. I love interacting with students. So it has been a wonderful experience, but honestly, it was not a very well-prepared program. I was just kind of following what interested me, and then things fell into place.
Well, Mike, you mentioned there were some questions that you still had. What were some of those questions?
Okay, so I know I'm older than y'all. I went to college between 1988 and 1992. And I was a religious studies major, but my main focus was political science. And in those days, to be interested in political science and international relations meant one thing: you studied the Soviet Union. And so by the time I graduated, I knew everything about the Soviet Union. I knew its history, I knew the October Revolution. But then, if I may be honest with you, the whole damn thing fell apart. Mm-hmm. And I remember going into my Sovietology class, and we were asking the professor when Gorbachev was making reforms, and we're saying, what's going on? What's going on? And he said, I have no idea. Like the whole class was just this, you know, it was anybody's guess. Mm-hmm. And I thought, you know, I'd like to study something more permanent than the Soviet Union. And so I chose God. I figured God was a little more unchanging than the Soviet Union. So that's when I transitioned.
It's not a bad transition,
mm-hmm.
Definitely. So you shifted your focus from more politics into religion. Did you pursue, Mike, did you do graduate studies right after finishing your undergrad? Did you do a master's program or go straight to your Ph.D.?
That's basically it. So I went from Northern California, where I was at Santa Clara University. I went to Boston College and went straight into theology. And I started off as a master's student and then graduated to the Ph.D.
Right. And then afterwards, when did you get your PhD, Mike?
1999.
1999.
And then I taught for a few years at Notre Dame, which was a great experience, but it wasn't a tenure track position. We academics are always looking for the cushy job, the tenure position. And so there's nothing at Notre Dame. And then there was this weird opening at Baylor University in Waco, Texas. So my background's Catholic theology. Baylor is the world's oldest and largest Baptist university. And now, Waco has a fairly decent reputation thanks to, Chip and Joanna Gaines. But back then it meant one thing, David Koresh. So it had a terrible reputation. So I thought, why on earth would I, as a Catholic theologian, be interested in this job? But I actually had a couple of Catholic friends who were at Baylor, and they said, no, it's a great place. So I did come down and I fell in love with it.
I mean, you've really been all over the US for your undergraduate studies, then your master's, or then your PhD rather, in Massachusetts, and then doing most of your professional work as an academic in Texas. That's quite a big jump, both geographically, but maybe culturally too, just within the United States. Did you find that sort of shifted you, just being, does your sense of space and your sense of place, do you think that has affected you a little bit in terms of what your focus has been? Maybe perhaps your favorite alcoholic beverage to drink, maybe just spitballing here.
Yeah, I know. That's a great question. I think the good news about me is that I'm happy to plant roots wherever I am. And coming to Texas was a bit of a culture shock. There are a lot more pickups on the road. There are a lot more guns around, and it was a bit of a surprise. But I've been here for 17 years. I think I've become more of a redneck. And I got a dog, I got a pickup, I got a heck of a lot more guns than I did when I was in Massachusetts, which was nearly impossible. And I've definitely appreciated some of the local drinks of Texas.
Right. You've embraced the Texas vibes. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, that's great. I mean, in terms of your academic writing, as well as your PhD focus, has that always been connected with your focus in some of your more recent writings in terms of religious contexts and associated with alcoholic drinking? Has that been a consistent focus for you, or was that a big change to what you specialized in doing your PhD?
Oh, absolutely. Maybe someplace, but not at Boston College, can you get a PhD in alcohol and theology? No, it was all straight up academic theology. But I've always been interested in the intersection of theology and culture. And a part of Western culture is, the responsible use of alcohol. And my wife and I, we always enjoyed a drink together when we were courting, when we got married. We have 6 kids, which is another reason for daily drinking. My wife homeschools, which is an additional reason for daily drinking. So we felt that the evening happy hour was a very important part of the day. We would catch up on, how did your day go? How's this kid behaving? Sometimes that news is better to receive after the second round. And so we did have a kind of a culture of a responsible but daily use of alcohol. But we were also interested in the sort of the customs of the Catholic calendar. And it's a very rich history. but most of the history is about food. Like, you go on Amazon, you will find dozens of excellent Catholic cookbooks that give you a certain meal for a certain feast day. But I was surprised to find that there was no Catholic bartender's guide. And when I discovered this, I thought, there's a gap that needs to be filled. And that's kind of what pushed me in that direction.
Not that I've searched for too many cookbooks myself. I'm more of a wing it kind of guy in the kitchen myself. But yeah, we're definitely all about, pairings and I've definitely been one to go and buy a certain beer for a certain occasion. You have certain meals for certain occasions, etc. So, why not do that for a wider span of alcoholic beverages?
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. That was the goal of writing Drinking with the Saints, to come up with a kind of a clever tie-in between a particular beverage and, a saint's memory.
Yeah, I want to get more into Drinking with the Saints, but I kind of want to lead up to it a little bit, because it's I guess what my curiosity is, that the Catholic faith is so enormous and it spreads across the world. It's certainly it's a remarkable religion, just how overreaching it is in terms of, there are Catholics in South America, there are Catholics in Africa, there are Catholics in Asia, there are Catholics in Europe, there are Catholics in every continent. So it seems like quite a challenge in terms of pinpointing, or rather dissecting, Catholicism out of a particular culture, if you know what I mean. Can you always associate a particular food or a drink with a religion if it's so spread out? Because Brazilians are Catholic and they have their own culinary customs, and in the Philippines, well, they're Catholic and they have their own customs. So how do you do that? How do you pinpoint certain things in that realm and say that's culturally Catholic?
Yeah, I know, that's a great question. And yeah, Catholicism is literally all over the map. And so there's so many different iterations of it. I know we should be talking about beer, but perhaps the best analogy is to think of Catholicism as vodka. It's strong, but it's colorless and without flavor, and then you just need to add it to local ingredients, then it becomes something different.
That's a great way to put it.
It's a great metaphor, yeah. So Mike, how did you do research for the text itself? How were you able to pinpoint particular events or days of the year and locate the best or appropriate drink that correlates with these days? How do you even know, where do you even begin in terms of research for that?
Oh, well, I'll be honest with you, Andy, it was the best research project ever, because I had to research the lives of the saints, which are always fascinating, especially the older stories, which are filled with such interesting and fantastic elements. But then I also had to learn a lot about alcohol, the different ways in which alcohol is made and the different varieties across the world. So basically, I was looking for just some tie-in between a saint and a drink. And the best case scenario is you knew what the saint drank. But with the early saints, they didn't have the options that we do. The distillation hadn't been invented. They didn't have gin, bourbon, whiskey. They just had, wine, beer, and maybe mead. The later saints, much more explicit biographies. So, for example, we know exactly what John Paul II, who was, canonized a number of years ago, we know exactly what he drank. We know, for example, that unlike most Poles, he did not favor vodka. And we know this from a very good source, the KGB.
Back to the Soviets.
All right.
Back to the Soviets, that they, what they used to do in Poland in the 1950s is spy on all priests and bishops, trying to find a vice by which they could blackmail them. And they had a fat dossier on Karol Wojtyła, the later John Paul II, and they were very disappointed to discover that he did not care for vodka. He liked a little bit of white wine cut with water, and he was a very abstemious drinker.
The more recent saints, obviously, we have more documentation on them, so that would be easier. Do you know, maybe Mike, just because Garrett and I are a little bit more interested in beer, could you tell us a few of the bigger beer drinkers throughout history in the Catholic faith?
I am happy to report that there is a long and glorious history of beer and Catholicism. There are several patron saints of beer. Saint Arnold, we have Saint Arnold beer here in Texas. He's one of the patron saints of beer because he was a bishop in a diocese in France, and the plague was coming in, and it was coming in through waterborne pathogens. And so he urged his congregation to drink beer rather than water, and they were spared from the plague. And he is now a patron saint of beer.
Wow.
I'm also happy to report that there's an old book of blessings for priests, and one of the blessings is a blessing of beer. There isn't a blessing of hard liquor. There is a blessing of wine, but there is a blessing of beer. And the preface to the blessing is, "O God, who out of your loving kindness invented beer for the relief of mankind."
Words to live by.
Yeah,
You
that's
know, I
beautiful.
think it's a good religion.
I'd say so.
That's so good. So okay, so Saint Arnold, he's kind of the number one. He is the patron saint of beer.
Yes, he's one of them. There are several.
Okay.
Because he wasn't the only one who advocated beer instead of water during times of plague. One of the things we forget about, there are Christian teetotalers. And I teach at the world's oldest and largest Baptist university. And ironically, it is a dry campus. And here I am, writing all these books. But this movement could not and did not start until the advent of safe water treatment plants. Because for most of human history, your water was dirty and it was filled with germs. And the only way to purify it was by adding a little bit of alcohol. Roman soldiers were given, I think it was a liter of wine a day. It wasn't so that they could get drunk. It's so that wherever they went, they could pour a little bit of the wine into the local water. It would kill the germs and make it potable.
Yeah, it's a magical substance, alcohol. I mean, we still use it to this day, right? As a disinfectant. I mean,
For sure.
Also in terms of beer's really good too, because you have to boil beer as well. So that is an also way to kill it. You mentioned a few other. So Mike, how up to speed are you? If I named you a saint, could you tell me probably what their favorite alcoholic beverage was?
Oh, well, there's only one way we'll find out. You got to give me a shot.
Well, there's an obvious one, St. Patrick.
A lot of legends about St. Patrick.
Would love to hear some.
So one of them is totally anachronistic. There's a legend about St. Patrick and whiskey. Now, I say it's anachronistic because when Patrick evangelized Ireland, whiskey had not been invented. Whiskey was, small side note, invented by Irish monks in the 10th or 11th centuries. The Scotch have never thanked us for this, by the way, but we were the ones who invented whiskey. We brought that knowledge with us when we evangelized Scotland in the Middle Ages. The first reference to whiskey in any written account is in a medical manual, where the Irish monks recommend it as, quote, a cure for paralysis of the tongue. And obviously it works, for no Irishman has ever been accused of having a paralyzed tongue. But there is a legend about St. Patrick that he went to an innkeeper and he asked for a glass of whiskey. and he got a very short pour, and he walked away unhappy. He came back a year later, and the innkeeper said, I don't know what's happening, but I think there's a demon in my cellar, and he's plaguing me with misfortune. And Patrick said, the only way to exorcise the demon is to be generous with your customers. And so from that moment forth, he gave what's still called in Ireland Patrick's pour, which is a generous amount of whiskey, and the demons went away.
The fact that we consider St. Patrick a little bit more with copious amounts of beer drinking, that's a bit more of a modern tradition. Does that suffice to say?
Certainly the green beer is a modern tradition.
Right. Yeah, I did read somewhere, I don't know if it's true, if it's complete fiction, that St. Patrick did have his own brewer, like his own private brewer who brewed his own beer. I don't know if that has any merit to it, if you've heard that.
Well, you know, with the Irish, it's always very difficult to separate legend from fact. But I will tell you this, and you can look this up online. It's very beautiful. One of his early disciples was Saint Bridget, who is one of the 3 patron saints of Ireland. And Saint Bridget has a prayer called the Lake of Beer. And she envisions heaven as a lake of beer. But it's a lake of beer in which the poor are invited. It is the whole community that's able to come. So it's not just, dive in and get drunk. The lake represents everyone coming to the festival. The rich and the poor, the marginalized, the not marginalized. Let us all gather at the lake of beer. And that is how St. Bridget imagines heaven.
I think that's how Garrett and I imagine heaven too.
For sure.
Yeah.
Maybe not a lake, like there's probably just an unlimited tap, but like if it's a lake too, that's fine. I can get on board with that.
I've done some research, Mike, for a video series that we created on beer history associated with particular countries. And it seems like a lot of, I don't know if you're too privy to the connection with beer and monasteries and monks across Europe, but I'm always fascinated by that, just sort of the spread of whether it be beer or a different style of alcohol. And it seems like if you go back 500, 800, 1,000 years, it just seems like the predominant, in the beer world anyways, the predominant brewers of a community were always the monks. They were the ones who were sort of, that was their main form of livelihood in order to live the way they saw fit. Their way to fund their lifestyle was to create beer. Is that true in terms of just sort of all of European? Is that a European thing? Does that sort of spread out towards different parts of the world? Is that a predominantly Christian thing? Is it?
Yeah.
Can you see that in other religions? I don't know if you know any of this. I suspect you do, so I'm asking.
Medieval monasteries basically perfected the modern brewing process. Christians did not invent beer. It was, the Babylonians, centuries ago or millennia ago. But it's not so much that the monks themselves were, alcoholics or drunkards, but it was just kind of a perfect storm in a good way. The monks had land, and the land could raise crops like hops and, etc. They had stability. They could pass on a memory, a tradition of doing things a certain way from one generation to the next. And then they had a commitment to excellence. The Benedictine motto is ora et labora, work and pray. So everything a monk does in his work is a form of prayer. He's not committed to profit. He's committed to excellence to God. And when you put all those things together, you get a recipe for outstanding beer.
The passion in each glass. Yeah.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And so to this day, for example, you have the Trappists who continue to make what I would say is the finest beer in the world. And the United States recently has a Trappist monastery, Spencer, in Massachusetts,
Yeah,
that is now making fantastic beer.
Have you been, Mike?
I've been to Spencer. I was there before they actually got their brewery, but I have since tasted their beer, and it's very different from the Abbey ales of Europe, but it's still excellent.
How do they differ? It's interesting. I think there's 9 or 11 official Trappist breweries in the world. Half of them are in Belgium, I think.
You're absolutely right. It's like Belgium, Germany, Austria.
Yeah.
And these Trappists in Massachusetts got permission several years ago to have Trappist beer because there are very strict requirements. Unlike other religious orders, for a Trappist beer to be called Trappist, it actually has to be made by the Trappists. They can't, farm it out. They can't outsource anything. So it's like a very strict internal control. But they didn't do the heavy double, triple Abbey ales of Europe in Spencer. They did a lighter beer, much more effervescent, a lot hoppier, but very, very good.
Is it easy to find Spencer beer outside of Massachusetts?
Oh, absolutely. No, it is available. So I'm in Waco, Texas. It's not the worst place to buy alcohol, but it's not the best place. So I can't walk into my local liquor store and get it. But if I went to Dallas or Austin, I could find it.
What's your favorite alcohol, Mike? Alcoholic beverage.
I am a martini guy. But that said, I recognize the great value and beauty of beer on many different occasions, especially during the summer for me, after a long sweaty day. And, Texas has some awful summers. Sometimes a martini is just too harsh at the end of a hot summer day, but there are excellent beers to quench one's thirst.
So do you prefer, if you had to go martini, Mike, are you tried and true to the vodka, or do you dabble with maybe like gin or something else?
So, Garrett, I'm strictly Orthodox. It is a gin martini. I do not believe in heresy. And a vodka martini is heretical. And I would have to burn you at the stake.
All right. Noted.
Oh, all right. That is good to know. Mike, I guess that relates to, can you tell us about your venture next April in 2023? You have an event that you're coordinating or at least you're participating in. You're venturing off to Spain and Portugal for your religious pilgrimage, riverboat cruise, sounds like. Can you tell us a little bit about that, as well as its connection to drinking?
My wife, Alexandra, and I are teaming up with a great master chef, Father Leo Patalinghug, who has a show on EWTN. And we are going to take a riverboat cruise on the Douro River from Portugal to Spain. We're going to be visiting a number of important pilgrimage sites, but Douro also happens to have the distinction of being an outstanding region for wine and port. So we will be mixing the high and the low, the pious and the Epicurean while we go on this pilgrimage together.
Maybe can you expand on the religious connection to the cruise itself? Is it a bit more of a casual tourist attraction, or is there a strong fundamental religious component to it?
Well, there is a religious foundation. There will be, daily mass. There will be tours to various churches and other pilgrimage sites. But at the same time, it will be also a time of, merriment and festivity. It's not going to be, a strict Lenten tour. It will be filled with spiritual edification, but also good fellowship.
Your academic career, Mike, that's going on close to 20 years, have you been able to take advantage of any other travel opportunities for perhaps any sabbatical, perhaps, or any academic conferences? Have you done much traveling in terms of your professional development?
I give a lot of tours across the country. I have a talk, How to Drink Like a Saint, which is fairly popular. But I just got back from Ireland, where my heart was broken. And it was over beer.
No.
I always thought I was a Guinness man. I love Guinness. And Guinness in Ireland is actually better than Guinness in the United States because they don't have to pasteurize it when they sell it in the Republic of Ireland. And so I was enjoying Guinnesses there. But then one day in Ireland, I tried Beamish Irish Stout. And holy cow, was it good. It had hints of coffee and chocolate. And I fell in love with it. I hate to say this, but I found it much better than Guinness.
Wow.
And then I came back to the United States. I was all excited, and I discovered they do not export outside the Republic of Ireland. And now I'm a little unhappy.
A fine reason to return to the beautiful
absolutely
island of Ireland. Yeah.
I'm
Interesting.
sure you brought a few back with you to tide you over, or no?
Had I only known, like I thought, oh, this is great. It's in cans. I'm sure I could get it somewhere. No.
Is that from a small, is that a craft brewery or a bigger player in Ireland?
You know, they've been around for generations, but even within the Republic, I think they're out of Galway, but don't quote me on that. And then we went to Southeast Ireland to Kilkenny, and I said, "You have Beamish?" "Oh well, we don't sell that in this county." Well, come on, why not? So, yeah, even within Ireland, it was a little bit heartbreaking.
Are you able to take advantage? You said you've done quite a bit of sauntering around the country. Has that been an opportunity for you to imbibe a little bit in local delicacies? Has that been an interest to you?
Oh, absolutely. And you know, here in Waco, we have Balcones Distillery, which makes outstanding Texas whiskeys, and they have recently broken out into beer. And I don't know how widely available it is, but in town they're excellent. I've also given talks in the bourbon country of Kentucky and visited a few distilleries there. Also very satisfying.
Definitely no shortage of fine whiskey distilleries in the great state of Texas. Yeah. Going back to your original text, it sort of spanned into, now you have sort of a trilogy of books that have sort of stemmed from Drinking with the Saints. Is that right? You have two other books associated with it.
That is correct. So after Drinking with the Saints, I came out with Drinking with Saint Nick, which gives you drinking suggestions for every day of the Advent and Christmas seasons. And then following that, I did Drinking with Your Patron Saints. So if there's a particular vocation, occupation, ethnicity that you have, you find the patron saint of that and then lift a glass in their honor.
My patron saint, or who I'm named after, would be Saint Andrew, who's the patron saint of Scotland. Mike, if I were sharing a beverage with Saint Andrew right now, what would we be drinking?
Well, Andy, I'm a little bit scared for you because he's the patron saint of Scotland, he's the patron saint of Greece, and he's the patron saint of Russia.
That's right, Russia. I did.
And those are three very hard drinking countries. So you have an embarrassment of riches to deal with there, my friend.
Can you recall his favorite beverage?
Well, I can't recall his favorite beverage because he lived in the 1st century and he didn't have vodka or any of the Greek offerings.
Scotch.
Yeah. Okay. So that's where you get creative.
Right.
And so you honor the cultures that honor him. And so, yes, there are great scotches that you can have in honor of St. Andrew. There are also vodkas from Russia.
Vodkas.
Yeah, it's an embarrassing list of options.
Okay, and then drinking with Saint Nick, so that allows readers to kind of know what beverage to drink on the days leading up to Christmas. That's correct?
That is correct. And mulled wine was a traditional favorite during the Advent season, but the other thing was Christmas ales. They were huge. And in the Middle Ages, yes, the monks were brewing, but also individuals were brewing as well. And the goal was you had to brew all your winter ales before the feast of St. Thomas, the Apostle, which was on December 21st. You wanted all the work out of the way so that you could, for the 12 days of Christmas, you would have nothing but merriment and relaxation. So in Norway, where brewing was very big, you finished all the brewing on St. Thomas's Day. And then that night, everybody went to everybody else's house and sampled their home brew.
Oh, cool.
And the nickname for Thomas the Apostle in Norway was Thomas the Brewer, even though he never brewed, but it was because of, make sure everything was ready for his feast day that they invoked him as a patron.
Interesting. So in coming up with those pairings for the days, like what went into that? Is that, based on some previous history? Is that maybe some of your own research that you found that it was more appropriate for a certain day with a certain beverage?
It was all of the above. When you found an historic reason to pair a drink with a saint, that was great. But sometimes you had to be more creative. So for example, February 5th is the feast of Saint Agatha. She is famous in Christian art because she was an early Roman virgin martyr. And the way the Romans tortured her was they severed her breasts. And so in Christian art, she's often portrayed with this tray holding her breasts. So what kind of drink would you pair for St. Agatha? Well, I found a Prohibition era cocktail called Twin Peaks. And so that is her drink for her feast day.
That makes sense, of course.
What about the big days, Mike? What should, under your thoughtful supervision, what should a Catholic be drinking on Christmas Day, for example?
So many options. Again, you've got the mulled wine, you've got the Christmas ales, the Christmas beers. Champagne is a historic favorite. The Christmas punch, which can be wine-based or rum-based. That was the more, modern iteration. We've got the Feast of Pentecost coming up in a couple of weeks. There is a wonderful tradition of brewing for Pentecost, and it's called Whitsun Ale. Whitsun Ale is now summer ale, but in the Middle Ages, summer ale was called Whitsun Ale. Whitsun is short for Whit Sunday, which is the medieval name for Pentecost. So you can have a summer ale on Pentecost and remember this older tradition.
Wow, it's such a spider webs of
So
web
much
of
behind
information.
it,
Trying to keep up, Mike. It's difficult. Mike, is there any? Garrett and I were actually speaking before we started. Are there any pieces of writings, perhaps in the Bible or any, not specifically in Catholicism, but any sect of Christianity that doesn't permit the consumption of alcohol? Does that exist in Christianity at all, or even alludes to the piety of prohibition or the preference of prohibition?
So the biblical model is that drunkenness is consistently condemned, but a moderate use of alcohol is presupposed as a normal part of your daily life. The Hebrews had wine at their Passover. Jesus Christ's first miracle was turning water into wine at the wedding of Cana. He chooses wine for the sacrament of the Eucharist at the Last Supper. So drunkenness is condemned, but alcohol is not. And so that's the biblical model. The early Christians followed that. Now, there were some Catholic religious orders as a sign of kind of heroic virtue that gave up alcohol. And so there were teetotaling orders in the Catholic Church. The funny thing is, they never lasted beyond 2 generations. The religious orders that did last were the Benedictines, and the rule of Saint Benedict guarantees a pint of wine to each monk every day, unless he is late for dinner 3 times, and then his wine shall be taken away from him.
Don't be late for dinner.
Yeah,
Exactly.
definitely not.
There are Southern Baptists and other Christian groups, especially in the American South, that do take a very dim view to alcohol. But these are very modern developments. It's only the 19th century. And in fairness, what are they responding to? They're responding to the American saloon, you know, where hard alcohol and gambling and, you know, fooling around all go hand in hand. And so understandably, there's a reaction against the abuse of alcohol. And so that makes sense, but there is a history of Christian moderation, which allows you to enjoy the fruit of the grape or the grain and still be a virtuous Christian person.
More of the sinful debauchery of drunkenness as opposed to the moderate consumption of some alcohol. Because I know there are some religions, I'm thinking of Islam as one, I believe alcohol is prohibited entirely in Islam. Is that correct?
That is correct. Though even in the Middle Ages, Muslims found ways of getting around that. So the Quran says, "You shall not drink 1 drop of wine." And so there were Muslim leaders, caliphs in the Middle Ages, that were used to drinking and being leaders. So they would take their glass of wine, they dip their finger in it, and they would flick out 1 drop and then drink the rest of the glass.
Quite strategic.
Not 1 drop, but all the other drops. Of course.
Very wise.
Clever. Very clever.
There are always ways around legalism.
Mhm.
Yeah. Finding a loophole even in that ancient text.
Mike, while we're coming pretty close to our hour mark, you're a very natural storyteller, and I want to know so much more about different saints and what they would have drunk. Any other writing projects you might have in the works? Is there potential for a 4th text that stems from your original, or are you leaning towards perhaps a different focus in what you're working on?
Again, great question. I'm working on 2 books right now. One is actually a Catholic cookbook. I mentioned that there are already some on the market, but I'm teaming up with Father Leo that we're going on the cruise with. We're going to do dining with the saints, and we're going to provide some food to pair with the various drinks that one can have. And I'm also going to do a mocktail book. We're going to call it Dry Drinking with the Saints, to provide some non-alcoholic alternatives, which I don't have represented in my cocktail books. But just as there are reasons to drink, there are occasionally reasons not to drink. You know, if you're pregnant, it's Lent, you need to pare down, you need to reboot. So we're going to provide a book for that demographic as well.
That's great. Cover all the bases. And we're seeing actually, you know, we were talking about this not long ago, that there is a big push towards non-alcoholic beverages, you know, whether it's non-alcoholic beer or non-alcoholic cocktails, but sort of that shift to maybe if you are going to drink something, it's more quality over quantity. And then, you know, time again, you don't even want to choose the alcoholic option.
That's right. And the important thing is not the alcohol. It's not the buzz. It's the fellowship. It's the friendship. It's getting together and kind of having a ritualistic engagement of each other. And when you're sharing drinks and toasting and sharing memories, that's what it's all about.
Mike, I have one additional quick question. Do you know does Pope Francis drink?
I don't know. Well, okay, so he's Argentine, and they've got interesting drinking habits. They are obviously a South American country, and Fernet Branca is an Italian liqueur. which is extremely bitter. It's like Jägermeister. It's just really harsh stuff. They use it for their barbecues. The Argentines have a very rich tradition of barbecue, and they swear it is a cure for hangovers as well. So I'm sure he's had it at some point in his life. When he visited Queen Elizabeth, she gave him a bottle of whiskey that is distilled only on her royal estate. And I really, really want to know if he ever tried it. And if he didn't, could I have it?
I didn't know about the royal whiskey, you said.
Royal whiskey, yes.
Which
Give him
is
a bottle.
Yeah, which estate is that distilled on? Do you know?
I don't know, but she does have estates in Scotland. They go, the royal family still goes hunting in these, the northern parts of their kingdom. So I assume it's from Scotland, but I don't know.
Probably, yeah, not in Buckingham Palace. Probably somewhere
That's
else.
right.
Who knows? Could be in the basement somewhere.
Yeah, maybe.
You never know.
It's a pretty big property. Well, Michael P. Foley, thank you so much, author of Drinking with the Saints, The Sinner's Guide to a Holy Happy Hour. Be sure to check it out, along with Mike's upcoming experience, his river cruise pilgrimage entitled Drinking and Dining with the Saints on a Douro River Cruise. So be sure to check that out. Mike, thanks so much for your time. I think Garrett and I could have listened to 100 more stories. We look forward to maybe connecting again pretty soon. We'd love to chat and learn a little bit more from you.
Thank you so much. I wish we could all be having a drink together right now.
Same.
That'd be great.
We'll let you know the next time we're in Texas for sure.
In Texas.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. You too. God bless.
God bless.
Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all our interviews and beer-related content. Remember, craft beer is here.